It has been almost a year since I feel like one of the craziest scandals went down with an Australian author who published an extremely questionable book and was almost immediately arrested. But we've got updates. Let's talk about it. My name is Taylor Rose, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about everything reading and writing. I did not initially make a video on this when it hit the American news cycle, which was not quite a year ago. So if you don't know, I'm talking about the book Daddy's Little Toy by Tori Woods. So you can see the cover here already sending out red flags. This was immediately followed by, you know how romance novels usually have two little blurbs from the two POV characters? Well, we have the blurb for this book here with the FMC Lucy saying, "I can't help myself when I'm around him. I wet my pants in excitement. At night, I use my unicorn Stuffy's horn on myself. All I think about while I'm being naughty is my dad's best friend and how I wish he could be my daddy." Sorry. "I'm the freak of my family. My dad is disappointed in me. My mom dismisses me. And my sister despises me. I'm delusional if I think author would ever want to play with me." You're delusional for different reasons, honey. And then Arthur's POV. "My juicy Lucy. She's finally 18. I've wanted her longer than I can ever legally admit. She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to be my perfect little toy. My precious little unicorn. And I'm going to be her daddy. When I see her playing dress-ups, I forget about the fact that she's my best friend's barely legal daughter, or that her mom hasn't protected and cherished her like she should. What does her mom have to do with this? All I know is that she's meant to be my baby girl." Which, while I am the first to tell you that I am a prude, and I don't like really exposing myself to that kind of content, I might say yuck to a lot of things. Ultimately, it does boil down to, are you two consenting adults in a consensual, unharmful relationship? I do feel like there are some things that you should go to a therapist for. And when your bedroom activities involve children, imagined or otherwise, that's one of them. That's one of them. I mean, and obviously if there were actual children involved, like that's a crime and you should be arrested. But people, the ARC readers, were the ones who kind of raised the alarm in Australia. We have this one from Nini, who posted the review on Goodreads saying, "I got an ARC, but my review/rating are my own. I had to DNF. I think 23% was a good amount for me to review. This book has one problem. It should be on the trigger warnings. It has pedophilia. The male main character started noticing the female character when she was 3. I'm sorry, but 3 years old? Quote unquote, wanting a woman as sweet as my friend's toddler daughter, Lucy, who was 3 at the time." Gross. And then there's this section here, which is very graphic, and I am not going to read it out loud. And Nini's note for this is, "I can't remember how old she was here, but she was still a child, so yeah, no, this is pedophilia. I can't. They have a 29-year-old age gap. That's okay if he didn't want her since she was 3. I wanted to continue, but I couldn't stop thinking about this." Yeah, I don't blame you. I would be hung up on that too. So the author did release a statement on her Instagram when the backlash first started, saying the following. "Hi everyone, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Daddy's Little Toy is definitely not promoting or inciting anything ever to do with child sexual abuse or pedophilia. What is being said is grossly disturbing and breaks my heart as well as makes me sick. DLT is fictional and meant to represent the DDLG, or Dear Daddy Little Girl world. I understand where I went wrong, and that is why I had it removed from Amazon this morning. What happened between these characters, yes, started at a young age. No, woohoo, happened while she was young. Yes, there were thoughts, and I can see how that is frowned upon. Nothing like that happened until she was of age. I know nothing that I say is going to change or fix what I've written. There are, however, 3 innocent people who have been caught in the crossfire, and it needs to stop. Georgia, Misha, and Ashley, along with their businesses. Pixel and Quill Studio, the cover designer. Mish Taylor, PA, graphics, and Ava, book editor. These ladies were under no impression that I was Laura Ashley writing as Tori Woods. I reached out to these ladies to work with them as Tori and only as Tori. Georgia was my PA for Lauren Ashley and had only ever read half of my very first book and decided it wasn't for her. This is why she became my PA, because she was honest. G has raised concerns with me about people mentioning her arc form. This was copied from a template, hence why they all look the same. Misha Taylor has read a couple of my books, but not this one in particular. Neither of them knew to the full extent what was in this book. Ashley edited this book. She had asked me some questions, and in my replies, I wasn't entirely truthful. She did not read over my final manuscript, which became the published, now unpublished version. I am so sorry that I wasn't who I said I was, and I'm so sorry for the content in my book, and I'm even more sorry that this was missed as a trigger warning. I'll be removing myself from the book community. If I ever get back to writing, I will not hide who it is, and I will make sure the people I work with know the full content of my books. However, I don't see that happening. I am so sorry. So essentially what this boils down to is they lied to everyone involved that this wasn't what it was, which is crazy. Tori Woods, or Lauren Ashley, as she goes by for her main body of published work, is actually named Lauren Ashley Mastrosa. And once she released the book in March, she was charged because people reported her to the police in Australia, where it is illegal to write, distribute CSA. She was arrested that same month in March. It was learned that she works for a Christian charity marketing company. Her real name is Lauren Ashley Tessalin Mastrosa. Police seized hard copies of the book in question, which had already been removed from Amazon. And her first court date was March 31st, 2025. So that is right after she published her apology on social media. And of course, the three people that she mentioned in her apology did separate themselves from her immediately. So the cover designer, who was Georgia, immediately put out a statement saying she had received death threats because of making the book cover, but that she was not aware of what was in the book when she designed it. All I had known about the book was the blurb, which read barely legal, and in my mind, I truly thought that was okay, she said. I don't know. I find that questionable because it's like, look at the book cover. Look at the book cover. Those are baby toys. I don't know. I would have asked questions. The author, Tori Woods, Lauren Mastrosa, she was separated from her job at Baptist Care. Yeah. And so we've been in kind of suspense since this happened, but on February 9th, so only a few short weeks ago, she was found guilty of child abuse for having published this book. So apparently the original book had a myriad of trigger warnings in it, but they only included age gap, daddy kink, infantilization, physical abuse, profanity, sexually explicit scenes, and slut shaming. Yay. So not the pedophilia part, which I guess Mastrosa didn't think it was a big deal. The court did decide that Lucy's genitals are described in great detail, as is the sexual activity she engages in with Arthur while pretending to be a toddler. And one of the investigators named Chisholm, who sat down and read the entire book, found that the female protagonist was implied to be a child despite references to being 18, which obviously that's part of the kink, little girl kink. And so they were citing her, throwing tantrums, needing to be bathed, wearing diapers, playing with children's toys, and using childlike euphemisms, wee, etc., which, that is also part of it. Chisholm is quoted as saying, importantly, those descriptions and language are used in the portions of the book to describe a character similar to a young child when the sexual activity is occurring. This language is repeated again and again. The book invited the reader to imagine the very thing that child abuse material legislation prohibited, she found. As such, a reasonable reader would find the book undeniably offensive, the magistrate said, in finding Mastrosa guilty of possessing, disseminating, and producing child abuse material. Obviously, Mastrosa's lawyer, articles use the word barrister. I'm not familiar with the Australian legal system, obviously, so there could be significant difference in what they do, but from my understanding, it's a lawyer. They questioned police suggestions that the novel contained child abuse material to begin with, which I don't know. And so another constable had to read the whole book, and he testified that it contained parts depicting offensive content with someone implied to be a child. But, you know, again, the lawyer is saying the character is aged 18, role-playing as a consenting adult isn't illegal. Oh, apparently DD stands for Daddy Dom. I thought it was Dear Daddy. The Dom part makes it worse. I don't know. Apparently, she is on bail still and will be sentenced on April 28th. So we will see what happens in terms of that. I don't know. A lot of people have had mixed feelings on this. On a Reddit post discussing the, guilty verdict, we have this user who says, I don't know enough about the nuances of Australian law to gauge how much this conviction could be considered overreach. I remember there was a lot of anger and concern from an anti-censorship lens when these charges were brought. I can understand that concern, and I don't think it will be alleviated by this conviction. I don't believe that depiction of kink between adults should constitute CSAM or be conflated with sexually objectifying actual children. The info in the Guardian article indicates that this conflation is present in the court's decision, which does trouble me. The character role-playing similar to a young child is still not a child. Which I agree to an extent. I mean, obviously the book's not available. I do think how it's describing things is important. The most egregious excerpt I remember is the male lead actively, explicitly fantasizing about the female lead when she was a small child, because this scene, like the rest of the book, was written with the intent to titillate and arouse. It's the closest equivalent to CSAM, but I don't see that scene referenced in this article or differentiation made between sexualizing a 3-year-old character and the adult FMC engaging in consensual, childlike behavior as kink, which is the content that seems to be highlighted here. Which is a good point. People who have read the book did say that there are multiple scenes of the MMC imagining an actual child, her as a child, when she was a child. Like the Goodreads review quoted, apparently he was looking up her panties when she was actually underage. So I definitely think that should have been addressed in the articles. That should have really been what the legal case hinged on, I think. The purposes of anti-CSAM law should be to protect children from exploitation and harm, not to determine whether a reasonable reader would find the book undeniably offensive. Offensiveness is objective. Exploitation and harm are not. I don't know. I've tried from the beginning to separate my own disgust with the material from the bearings of the charges themselves, especially as someone who is generally very anti-censorship. I still feel conflicted. Someone with a better handle on Australian law might be more equipped to assess this conviction. However, all this being said, I need to expound on my own visceral reaction to this woman for a minute, while acknowledging that in a legal sense, these are only my feelings. The detail that always stayed with me when this case hit the news last year was the dedication of the book for her 2 small children. I'm surprised this isn't mentioned in more. She dedicated the book to her 2 toddler children and said it changed the way that she looked at them. I'll try not to project my own experiences onto other people, but I want to state plainly that some mothers will actively exploit their children in horrific ways for a multitude of opportunistic reasons. In my experience, this can hold especially true for people who are most vocal and supercilious about their personal religious morality. My thoughts are with Mastrosa's children right now. Only thing I know for sure is they don't deserve any of this. And a user, Humble Celery, responded, I think what's important to note in this case is that child pornography laws, referred to legally as child abuse materials in New South Wales, where Sydney is, are much stricter than in the rest of the world. In most of the world, it is possession or distribution of explicit materials. In Sydney, it is possession or distribution of material that appears or is implied to be a sexual encounter with a child. So that could definitely explain why they're focused in the articles, at least. Obviously, I haven't watched the legal proceedings, I wasn't there, are talking about those specific scenes. Additionally, the law is worded as depicting a child who is or who apparently is under the age of 16 in a manner that is likely to cause offense to a reasonable adult. The implication is the crime. That's why the judge uses the word offense. Additionally, one of the arresting officers in the case given the task of reading the book specifically mentioned the passage where the adult male character sexualizes the character as a child. So when she was underage. I don't think there's a lot of room to say that the author didn't break the law, given how broad the classification of child abuse materials is where she lives, which she would have known before she wrote it. Hopefully. There's also mandatory reporting laws, meaning anyone who read an ARC and lived in Australia and didn't report it also could be implicated. And makes sense why a reader was the one to report it. ETA, my personal feelings about the author and from what we knew of the book, passages that were put in reviews and the dedication, is that this crossed a line. The sexualization of a character when they were a child should be enough. We're also at a moment in time in the world when powerful child predators are walking free with no consequences. So it's nice to see consequences. I think there's argument to be made about whether the law itself goes too far into free speech, etc., but I'd rather have child abuse laws be more strict than necessary rather than less. And the reality is, whether or not a person goes with the strictness of the law, it is still the law there. Yeah, it sums it up nicely. And the first commenter responded, "Thank you for the added detail about the arresting officer mentioning that passage. I know the Guardian article is only an overview, but it's much easier for me to see how the description of a child meets the threshold of written CSAM. I'm also bewildered that Mastrosa was apparently so ignorant of her country's laws." To your edit, I briefly went here in another comment, but I agree the laws need to be expansive enough to account for multiple types of abuse and exploitation beyond what we typically or historically think of as CSAM, especially in a rapidly technologically changing society. I don't want to get into the weeds of how much the Australian law, as it stands to prevent harm against children, which will always be my chief concern. Regardless, I wish I had any expectation at all that any CSAM law would translate into the most powerful people who abuse children being held accountable. Which, yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's kind of like we have this woman who wrote a kinky book getting arrested when billionaires who have done much worse are walking free all over the planet. Is disheartening. People on threads, Artie Baker author shared the article when it first hit the internet, I guess, the Guardian article. And so a lot of people were really upset about this article, basically making it out to be the kink part, which is kind of what the Reddit thread was addressing, that, you know, you're talking about, even though she was an adult, XYZ happened, when really the issues were the scenes where she was actually a toddler. And then in the foreword, quote unquote, "I couldn't look at my children the same after this." Like, what? Insane. Me looking at the husband. Yeah. This article is terrible and makes it sound like the police kink shamed the author while leaving out the parts of the MCC being attracted to the FMC when she was 3, needing his friends to keep him in line from acting on that attraction when the FMC was a minor. Even worse. Gross. And then this user said, "I'm probably going to put this badly, but I think this book is the end result of dark romance authors trying to deliver what readers want. Let me say I am all for dark romance as a tool to process. Reading or writing it, if you need that to deal with trauma, all power to you. What's an issue for me, which is just never talked about, is the people who are buying these books and using them to get off. I believe they are the ones asking for darker, more." Which that's, you know, a complaint a lot of people have with dark romance. Like, who is mainly asking for this content? Yeah. A Christian author thought this was okay to publish? Correct outcome, terrible article. I've already seen someone arguing this is bad news for romance authors, especially dark romance authors. They even tried feminism as a defense by saying it will affect women authors because women's rights are already under attack or something. I'm already so tired of all the ways people will contort themselves into amoral pretzels in order to excuse pedophilia. How hard is it to understand? Write all the dark shit you want, but don't bring kids into it. Exactly. I don't know. Not everything needs to be a romance. Not everything needs to be a romance. I don't know. And even if you're working through some sort of trauma, I don't want to be ununderstanding, but like in my experience, going through certain traumatic things, being assaulted, etc., it's like I could not stomach seeing those scenarios play out in a positive way. Like if I was going to consume content with that as a topic, I want to see him die. I want to see her get revenge, to be vindicated. Like, I want bad people punished. So I personally cannot understand wanting to see the perpetrator of such a horrible crime be happy and get a happily ever after. But that's just me. I don't know. I, for one, am happy to see people saying questionable things about children, see their comeuppance. I am very curious what Mastrosa's sentencing will end up being. We won't find out till April, I guess. Yeah. Sometimes people take things too far. And this was one of those times. Well, that is all for now. I will see you next time.